So we're only two today.
Okay.
Both Alicia and Marcio sent me emails at like 7 this morning being like, I am sick. So, yeah, there seems to be something going around. I have a lot of students in college who are also sick. And so be careful out there, Stuff is wandering, as it always does in November.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we're gonna last the whole 3 hours or whatever, right? We'll kind of take it by year. But yeah, we'll see where it goes. We'll still listen to Aya's presentation, which I'm sure is going to be phenomenal. I say that completely non-sarcastically, by the way. So far, I've enjoyed everyone's presentations, so there's no reason to believe otherwise. And yeah, we'll just kind of take it from there. As you might expect, I kind of planned today's class and today's main talking points around the idea of petrofiction and oil. And what was I going to say? Yeah, in next week's class, I was tentatively thinking of organizing it around ideas of resistance, right? Which is obviously a major part of this novel. If you've read that far into it, it happens pretty early on in the novel, so I don't think you need to read that far into it. But that's kind of tentatively how I was planning on talking about that. And as I mentioned last week, today I also kind of wanted to expand on the idea of neocolonialism, right? Since last week we talked a little bit about neoliberalism, I felt it was a good kind of parallel to make, or extension to make. Just so I know also what I reference or not, how far did we get along in the novel?
I read the first few pages,
Okay.
but I did get an overview of the novel, so I know what's it.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Good enough. The classic Sparks Notes version of it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's no longer Sparks Notes. Spark Notes is no longer a thing, but whatever.
Just clicking.
Sure. Okay. How about you?
100 pages.
100 pages. Okay, good. So yeah, a lot of the references that I pulled for today are within the first 50 pages or so, expecting that people were not going to finish the novel, which is fine. But yeah, so I kind of planned a lot of those quotes and so on. Yeah, in the first third, we'll say, of the novel. Okay, yeah. Anything else that I wanted to mention before getting into it? I don't think so. Oh, Aya, did you receive my comments for your critical reading?
I did.
Okay, good.
Yeah, the review.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure, because sometimes I have email problems, and I always like to make sure that everyone gets everything.
Okay.
All right. Any questions or anything from either last week or this week that we wanted to highlight before we get formally into it?
Okay.
All right, awesome. Did you want to kick us off with your presentation, or I can delay for as long as you want if you don't want to.
Okay. Disclosure: I'm not the best at PowerPoint.
I mean, there's a reason why I don't use PowerPoints in this class. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. Wait, before I start off, can I just point out how funny it is that I got the one, class material on oil?
Oh, yeah,
It was so funny. Okay. Right, so The Black and Coal Demon and Its Transformation of Space towards a Comparative Study of the World Literature of Oil and Place by Michael K. Wolonin. It's basically a text that explores petrocapitalism and kind of delves into the history of it, its roots, and how it's extended through Western imperialism. And it begins at the root of evil that I like to call America, and eventually describes how that same power was able to exploit the land and violate the natives' peace and right to resistance across the globe. So yeah, what it basically is the demon is the greed of the West, and it's like neutral commodity, but the engine of modern imperialism and the conquest of resources that violate the spaces of its inhabitants. It starts off with a classic tale of Moby Dick, in stating that the whale hunting was actually the first form of oil industrialism, because whales were hunted for their oils to illuminate and various other causes. And through the exploration of Ahab, who's the captain's greed, it depicts more of a global image of what that imperialism intends to do and the cruelty it requires for like the investors to be able to gain and profit from it. It's also the text also highlights that it's a depiction of modern oil industries, as there's different companies who invest in the oils, and same thing is done throughout Moby Dick. There's various aristocratic people who invest in different ships, and based on how well the ship's performance is, depending if like it results in whether they get their wealth back or whether their wealth diminishes. And most most of them invest in this very captain's ship, to highlight that the more barbaric you are, the more wealth you're promised. And so yeah, it basically depicts how Moby Dick is the source of maybe the first piece of literature that depicts that. And then we stay in the States and we move on to California, where during the beginning of the 1900s, a lot of oil was discovered in California, and up until maybe 1910, I want to say, California was responsible for 22% of the oil production in the world. And so that's an excessive amount for very little oil that they have. So naturally, it dried up pretty easily. And so yeah, the domestic blueprints more so like analyzes. Wait, sorry, I forgot to mention something at the start. Can
Take
I?
your time.
Okay. Like
There is no rush
Okay.
today.
But yeah, the the author of the theory text that we're reading today states from the very beginning that he's unable to thoroughly like analyze like Western imperialism. So what he's going to do is kind of go over different texts around the world and kind of like analyze through a local's perspective how it impacted the land. And so he starts from Moby Dick, and then we move on in time, but not in place. We stay in the United States. We move on to California, and we enter the subject of the actual patrol. And yeah, so it kind of thoroughly analyzes the exploitation of California's oil and the forced displacement of its locals. So yeah. And then moving south from the United States, we go to Mexico, where there's the White Rose. The White Rose is a text. It analyzes the root of American imperialism as it started nearby countries. So it went down to Mexico, and this one is more of a direct confrontation. It differentiates from other regions in the world because you have to be more tactical when you go abroad because there's a new land. However, Mexico is right next to California, so it wasn't that much of a hassle for America, and they already had corrupt leaders in place around that area, so the extraction was pretty easy. And it more so discusses the direct confrontation instead of analyzing more of like how they go about to get a grasp on the reserves. They're able to do so quite easily, and it essentially like represents the story of this man who refuses to sell his land, where various oil lies underneath, and it basically it not only travels, it not only like depicts the victory of America, like the easy victory of America over this Mexican man, but it also it implores more as like starting. It doesn't just start with his land; it starts with his land and eventually expands. And it's like it also analyzes like the local communities. Defense against the West and how they're able to confront them, but eventually are not able to stop them from getting their oil reserves. Okay, and then we move on to the Middle East. So, funny enough, Cities of Salt is actually a book that my uncle made me read when I was 10 and I didn't understand anything. And so I was really happy to see it there. But I do remember a bit of it. It's essentially the story of, well, actually, like, I'm gonna give more of like an insight here. When we talk about Gulf, the Gulf region, which is anything like Dubai, UAE, like Qatar, Kuwait, all of these countries, they're all essentially new countries. Like they're not historical countries. So whenever like any Arab meets someone from there, our first question is, where are you actually from? Because you're not actually from there. These countries came about around the 40s, 30s when they discovered that there might be oil underneath. And America imposed itself and forced their companies to be the sole ones on the land. And the this part of the paper where he discusses more of the Middle East soil industry, it analyzes how the West goes about, and essentially what they do is they find a group of corrupt locals who are ready to sell their lands for a bit of income. So what they do is originally, historically, who inhabited these lands were the Bedouins, who are the natives. They're nomadic people, tribes who move across the deserts. And they brought people from more industrialized countries that were neighboring the region and had them forcibly displace the Bedouins, kill the Bedouins, and erase all form of culture that was present in their land to then get the oil from there. And the Cities of Salt depicts basically the story. It doesn't state any country for a very specific reason to reject any Western like nationalism that was imposed on us after World War One. And it's the story of a man who travels across these regions and sees the devastation of the land and the displacement of the people. And then coupled with that text, the author as well states the Orientalist by race, and it's a text that couples well with this direct confrontations with the Bedouins because it analyzes more of like the romanticism of the oil industry, this like frivolous dreams of building these like empty towers, like now the region, that Gulf region is filled with towers and nonsense. But it also analyzes how they're essentially like it's a cultureless area that is stripped of history and is basically just standing buildings with no vibrance, and it doesn't share the rich culture of its neighboring regions. So yeah. And then as we move on from the Middle East, we go towards Africa, which is also where the text is set. So actually, I also forgot to point out earlier what enabled America to move so promptly towards the Middle East was the oil crisis during the 70s. The oil crisis was caused by the West enabling and causing more so the creation of the Zionist entity. And from there on, the Arabs decided to do an arms embargo. I wish an oil embargo on the West, which caused massive economical devastation across these countries. And so when the opportunity presented itself with these new areas with rich amounts of oil, America directly jumped on the idea and learned from the history of the native confrontation that it is better to have people on the ground, like natives on the ground who know the lay of the land more and know how to deal with the other natives there. So they learned from Mexico to the Middle East how to do so, and they continue that strategy across Africa. So they elect a bunch of corrupt leaders who profit off the exploitation of the land and don't give a grain back to the people who are actually affected by that industrialization. And so it starts with the pervasive web of oil, which is the circle of reason. It's one of the texts that is discussed. It explores oil as a force that fractures communities and dictates the fate of individuals regardless of where they are born. The destruction of place is non-transitional. So, so the forces unleashed by extraction in one region cause social upheaval and migration that destabilizes cultures. It also more so pits natives against one another because they profit off destabilization as well, because the more you destabilize a region, the less competition you have because they're too busy fighting each other to fight you. And that's the same method that was employed in the Middle East and that they did in Africa. And the second text on Africa is A Month and a Day by Saro, who is an actual historical figure and is from the Esso Company Oil. He led a sort of revolt against the oil company Shell, who was massively exploiting his village, and it led eventually to his execution. But because at that time they were still under colonial rule, so they couldn't have. Not only were they dealing with the industrial derivation of their land, but they were also dealing with colonization. So they had two different forces to fight along with the corrupt leaders. And so this one is more of a realistic depiction of what happens. And it is only in 2009 actually that the company Shell gave they settled the courts over the murder of Sarah Wiwo, of Ogoni, who was, no, sorry,
Take your time.
Sarah Wiwo, his execution. They settled it with his family over $9 million because they wanted to avoid further negative publicity, and they don't want like their company's actual history to be exposed to consumers, everyday consumers who use Shell. So essentially, like what the literature reveals is this consistent scheming plan to overthrow local organization in different countries and replace them by corrupt leaders who profit a bit off that the devastation of their lands. Basically, they sell out their people, they sell out their countries for a bit of wealth, and this is continued till this day. It's very present, and it is the case for, I guarantee you, every single Arab country. And it also, more in relation to the text that we're going to discuss, it also analyzes the native people's right to resistance, right to armed resistance, because essentially what we don't what they also don't say is it not only pollutes the land, but it actually kills the people. It is an unsafe, especially during that time where we explore these texts. It's an unsafe practice. It has caused various deaths, and it's not like after they're done with the oil extraction that they clean up their mess and they leave. They leave it as it is, and they might come back, they might not come back, and it leaves the natives in this liminal space in their own country where they don't know where to go anymore. And there's also it explores also that concept that we don't have here in North America because we are like a newly established like colony, and we are still on occupied land. However, like in countries such as in countries in the Middle East and in Africa, um, you know, the people who live here have been here for centuries. So a house is not just a house, especially because they don't deal with massive like temperature like we do with the snow and whatnot. The most they could have is just a heavy rain. Structures hold for much longer. And since they've been around historically for much longer, they know how to deal with their lands. They know how to build their architecture. So a house is not just a house. A house is a house that a grandfather and a great grandfather has had. So its demolition and its displacement, it's much graver than if we were here to be displaced because we don't have actual connection to the land like they do. And over like so essentially the text does not only analyze how these countries like how the West is able to um, invade these countries and cause coup d'etats left and right and elect whoever they want and derive the oil. It also explores the devastation of the native people who are left forlorn and homeless in their own country. And it leaves us with this message to fully support the resistance of the natives and push for Western imperialism. Well, push Western imperialism back to the West,
Good,
basically.
Yep.
So yeah, this is basically the text.
Good.
I feel like this is much shorter than 20 minutes. Did I speak too fast?
It's 5 to 9. We started. Yeah, no, it was about 20 minutes.
Really?
Yeah, by the time we chit chatted a little bit. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice. Can I ask you a question real quick, just for clarity's sake? First of all, excellent. You gave me a lot to write and think of, and it connects to a lot of what I had planned. So good job. What do you mean when you say that we have less of a history of this here? Because indigenous peoples have been here for at least tens of thousands of years, according to the archaeological record.
I mean, like us, like the three of us.
Settlers.
Yeah.
Okay. That I
Sorry.
figured. No, it's fine. I figured that's what you meant, but I just wanted to clarify that because it can be a bit of a dicey.
Exactly. No.
Yeah, I was like, that's a spicy take right there.
No. I mean, like us non-natives, like we're a recent colony.
Right, settlers. Okay, good. No, it's fine. That's good. Although, did you see the news recently? I don't know if any of you have read Thomas King's work. Speaking of Indigenous peoples in Canada.
Well, yeah, it was actually when I was reading this, it was how much correlation I see with like the forest right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a developing news story, but Thomas King, who made a very successful career here in Canada as an Indigenous writer. It came out today, just as I was coming to school. That turns out he's not Indigenous.
Oh.
Yeah, but he didn't know either. Like, he just recently investigated it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was like he's a fraud.
No. But that's the thing. It's like it becomes so dicey. Speaking of liminal spaces, because his dad always claimed that he was Cherokee, and that's what he was living his life based off of.
Yeah.
Right. And it literally came out today. I just opened it up 13 hours ago, according to the CTV News. But yeah, he's like, I looked into it, and turns out my dad lied.
Oh.
So this guy who made like a whole career out of telling First Nations stories and so on, and like teaching and writing from that perspective, and it turns out, no. Yeah, it's must be such a head trip. Anyway, that has nothing to do with what you were saying.
For him, but I feel like
Yeah,
his work, like he can still continue to do his work.
One would assume, but
Yeah.
because at some point he's 82 at this point. He's been writing stories since the 80s. I
Oh
want
my
to say
God,
like
at
70.
82?
Yeah.
That's
Like,
crazy.
how do you continue telling those stories? Do you continue telling them from a different perspective? I guess. Do you at that point are you just considered to be like formally like it's so dicey. I yeah, I don't know. That has nothing to do with anything we were saying. It was just like, yeah, I saw this morning, and it makes me think of this. Yeah. Okay, so there's a lot that you gave us to talk to. I liked the idea. What? Yeah, in relation to cities of salt, you wrote down like these deliberately unplaced people and spaces, and that's really awesome. I want to pick back up on that. There's a part in How Beautiful We Were that kind of echoes this, I think, in really interesting ways.
Oh, I forgot to mention
Please.
too in the oil
Mm-hmm.
by Sinclair.
Yeah.
It also shows how like private oil companies are
Mm-hmm.
able to buy themselves into politics,
Yeah.
and they're able to buy certain politicians
Mm-hmm.
and like basically allow them to do things that like violate the land.
Yeah.
And funny enough, there's like a direct correlation with what's going on now with our forests
Mm-hmm.
and how these external private companies are able to buy their way into the gouvernement de la CAQ.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're using the example of oil for for today and probably next week as well. I assume it's not going to go away. But yeah, this idea of relating extractive practices um, is tied up to so many elements of our life. You're bringing the Quebec example, but we had in Canada. This was in British Columbia, which was another like frontier space similar to California, which you bring up. Huge protests to stop massive logging, right? In what was called Fairy Creek. I don't know if you followed that at all, but it was like a huge effort by private companies to continue to raise these trees that are hundreds of years old, right? And I don't know, make more chairs that we don't need or whatever the hell they were going to do with it. And yeah, there was like this huge conceded effort. I think it worked. I don't think they're continuing. I don't know. I stopped kind of following it, unfortunately. But yeah, there was a huge effort by indigenous and local populations generally to stop it. And it's a really good example of how this small space, right? Fairy Creek is not that big, globally speaking, or planet wise, if you want to put it that way. But you saw massive state resources being put into stopping these protesters from protecting trees, right, on a relatively small place, right? The RCMP came in. I think that for a second the Army came in and just tried to remove these people from, again, just liking trees, right, being literal tree huggers. So yeah, not weird, awful scenarios. Okay, so you brought up some interesting terms that I want to write down and kind of unpack. So at the very start of your presentation, you bring up the term petrocapitalism, and later you bring up imperialism. You bring up just good old-fashioned Coca-Cola classic capitalism. It's an awful S. There you go. What else did you bring up? You also talked. Well, yeah. I guess you talked about industry and modernity, like extraction industry. And I'm not saying you're wrong in doing so, but the sense I got from your presentation is that you kind of use these terms interchangeably, right? Is that a fair thing to do, right? Is it like, how can we justify putting all of these things together? Because technically they're different terms. Right? I'm asking the question more conceptually, not as a criticism of you, right? But just to ask us to think about, I guess, why is it so easy for us to conflate these particular terms in this context? What makes it that they're all connected? Are they all connected? Is it fair to actually? I'm pointing to you, but obviously you can answer if you want.
Well, to me, like capitalism is just like the basic structure of it, like what it is essentially, like. And then there's more of a specific angle when we go towards petrocapitalism, because that is essentially the form of capitalism that is discussed in these texts. Like they're all based off petrol, and then but it's coupled with imperialism because it's not a local, like it's not they're not operating locally. It's like it becomes like an imperial thing.
Right. Okay.
Where they move from South America to Middle East and then to Africa.
Right, so capitalism would be like the economic structure, whereas imperialism kind of extends it out into space.
It's like they use like capitalism, but in more of a global way, so it becomes imperialistic.
Right. Okay, I see what you mean.
Yeah, because they also like have strongholds in these countries, so they build their empire.
Okay, good. I like that. So the idea of strongholds across the globe.
And then extraction, I kind of just threw it in there.
Yeah.
I mean, I just thought it's like actual like extraction of oil.
And again, the extraction might be the actual practice, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah.
Right? You can't have this without this. You can't have the extraction without the capitalism. You can't have imperialism without capitalism, and so on. Like it's you put it in a really, or you adopted Wellinen's term, I guess, the web of oil. Right? I forget is that your term or his term? The web of oil that you.
No, that was his term.
Yeah, it was his term. Okay, that's a really good one.
Yeah. The intricate web of oil industries.
There's a book by Jason Moore, who I think is giving a talk or gave a talk at UCAM last week, called "Capitalism in the Web of Life." That makes me think of. It's a pretty good book. Yeah, I say that. it's a pretty good book. I'm not uncritical of it, but by and large, it's worth checking out if you're interested. Leonie, is there anything you wanted to add on this? I think it's a good place to start. But is there anything you wanted to say or expand on? No. Okay. Cool. All right. Yeah, I think it's a really good place to start. These two have most classically been associated together, right? You see this rather famously in a lot of decolonial texts, right? Where as far back as the 1950s, right, you see people like Aimé Césaire and other African nationalists or African thinkers, right, kind of bridging the two together, right? And even farther back in, we're going to stretch my memory of when that text was published, early 20th century, right? You had revolutionaries like Lenin who would write pamphlets called "Capitalism, the Highest Form of Imperialism," right? Now, obviously, again, we can criticize both those people for what they did or didn't do or how that actually played out in real life, but...
Why would you criticize Lenin?
Why would... we don't have time to get into this right now.
No, we can criticize who came after, but...
Well, sure. But, criticize in the same way, like, criticize retroactively, right? Do you think, like, certain ideas were the actual correct path to follow and all that? It's less him and more like what... Yeah, I guess what you're right. Yeah. What came out of it. But you can also criticize what his perspective on what should be done, right? Like some people, for example, would criticize him on just how radical people like him are, right? Which again is neither here nor there, but it is That would be the grounds for criticism, for example. But all that to say that like this idea of tying capitalism to imperialism has like a long-standing history,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I just wanted to put that down on the board. Um, and I mean, Welleman brings this up explicitly in the title of his text, right? Toward a comparative study of the world literature of oil, right? This idea that, or this emphasis on the transnational element of oil, that yes is extractive, right? So literally you can extract from anywhere, but also as you kind of pointed to in your examples of the Middle East or African borders, right? It's something that in our engagement with it is inherently planetary. It transforms both geographies, right, in the literal borders, and geologies in the actual earth that we walk on, right? Creating either instabilities or just straight up changing the changing the way that certain things operate and look. Right? Creating this really interesting, if complicated and complex, interdependence of the local and the global. Right? Where it's almost impossible to dissociate a small locality or relatively small locality, whether it's in the Middle East or South America or anywhere else, right? California, from larger global planetary kind of constructs. Good. Anything else we want to add on that? This is all really good. What do we think of the idea of frontiers? This may seem like an odd question to ask, to just like drop into it. But one of the things that you brought up, and again, I'm thinking of California, but it's not exclusive to that example. It's just the one that you brought up in your presentation. But especially here in North America, but not exclusively, we tend to imagine the idea of frontier as something rather romanticized, right? One can think of Star Trek, right? How does that, if you've ever seen like a single second of Star Trek? No? Okay, damn it. Never mind, this is going to be an awful example.
But I just know the King of Jordan starred in it.
Right. The original series from the 60s starts off with a little speech called Space, the Final Frontier, right? We're going where no man has ever gone before, blah, blah, blah. Right? And this is not me dunking on Star Trek by and large. I think it's pretty cool. But the idea of reaching for a final frontier is something really worth unpacking. And I think it's something that you get at in your presentation a little bit with the California example. Right?
Yeah.
How does the idea of frontier, however we want to think about it, tie into everything else that we've been talking about as far as like oil, local and global connections, right? What do we imagine the frontier to be? Why is it so central to a lot of these narratives? I know it's a big question, but yeah, sorry, go ahead. Okay, first of all, let's start with what is a frontier. Like when we say frontier, what do we mean by that?
That's my issue. I'm not sure I know.
Uh-huh. Yanni, do you have a shot?
It's like imposed delimitations that are probably, like, I guess, arbitrary, and man-made to.
Oh, you mean like an actual country border?
It can be.
Okay.
It's not necessarily that, but it absolutely can be. So in French, but in French we don't distinguish, right, between border and frontier, right? It's frontière, right? So Absolutely, it can be a border. There we go. But the idea of delimitation is a rather broad one that I think works well within this context. Right? South America, a lot of South American countries, California, the Yukon, if you want to use the Canadian example again, British Columbia, all of these places at some point or another were considered frontiers, right? And this is why I bring up the Star Trek example, because of its use of the final frontier, right? Where do we have left to go? Space, right? At least in the imaginary of Star Trek in this case. Oh, that would be a good thing to do for our last movie day, right? Just an episode of like good old fashioned Star Trek.
Were you a Trekkie?
I like Star Trek. Yeah. I like the original series. I like it because it's so bad. You just can't help but laugh at what's his face, William Shatner. Right?
Oh, is he the one that plays?
He's the captain. No, that's Leonard Nimoy.
Oh yeah, Nimoy.
William Shatner plays Captain Kirk, the one in a yellow shirt. Spock, go to warp drive.
Everything I know from that is from the Big Bang Theory.
Yeah, exactly. A slightly less bad show. I don't know. Whatever. Right, but I guess we can use the term teleology of space. When I use the term teleology, do we know what I mean? Okay. Teleology is a term that indicates a drive towards progress, right? And a deliberate and conceivable endpoint, right? We are operating towards something. Okay? So that's what it means to think teleologically. And teleological thought is something that has existed for quite some time, right? But it really increased and exploded, I guess, in the Enlightenment era, right? When we had renewed ideas of what it meant to be, quote unquote, a civilization, right? For good or bad. And so with it came the idea of we are moving towards certain steps of civilization, right? So teleological thought in that sense. But again, a lot of religions, for example, and these are thousands of years old, have some form of teleological thought, right? You're going towards, I don't know, Buddhist enlightenment. You're going towards, Christian heaven, et cetera, and so forth, right? Some kind of imagined progress. Now, the reason why I bring up frontier, right, or the frontier, is that it's been historically explicitly tied to all of these other terms that Aya brought up in her presentation, right? Where the gold rush, for example, in California, right, is a really good example, right? Where we see this one last area where we can make like a lot of money, right? Under both capitalism, right? The idea that you can make your own, right? The American dream type of thing, but also explicitly tied to extraction, right? And imperialism insofar as it was often government sponsored in order to bring settlers to the West, right? The example of trees in British Columbia, right, is a really good one as well. The logging industry was heavily subsidized in order to send people out west, right? And constantly this rhetoric of the final frontier or this new frontier where we can send people on an adventure in order to expand outward is par for the course as far as like settler capitalism is concerned. Okay? Which is why I bring it up. I think it's a very useful term to keep in the back of our mind, even if it's not explicitly mentioned in How Beautiful We Were. But it is. It's kind of unavoidably tied to those narratives, right? Even if she doesn't bring it up, Mbue is arguing almost implicitly against those types of narratives, right? It's something that I have in my notes that we may or may not have time to get to in today's class, but part of what this novel does is write against pieces like Heart of Darkness, right? Again, sometimes explicitly. And Heart of Darkness is a perfect example of a frontier or a novella that is imbued with a sense of frontier, right? What is the last area that man, and I use man explicitly here, has not expanded to, right? Good. Yeah, I don't know. Does anyone have any questions about this? I just wanted to bring that up because I think it's a good term to have in the back of our mind. But
I had a question
yeah, please.
for frontier.
Yeah.
I feel like delimitation and borders are opposites.
So that's the thing. I put it there because of the French term that we were bringing up, right? Frontière, and but usually the frontier, right, is the thing just outside of officialized borders.
Yeah,
right.
Okay, I see.
But it's a good question, right? So the Wild West, for example, was considered for a long time a frontier, right? Like it's outside of quote unquote civilization, right? You have the American East Coast that has cities and business and industry, and then you have like the cowboys who are out there on the frontier. What's interesting is that the rhetoric of the frontier often starts off as like wild and unruly, quote unquote, and then becomes a border. Right, all of the spaces that, again, if we take the North American example, or the African example, or the Middle Eastern example, started off as final frontiers and then became imposed borders. Right, we brought the civilization of borders to them. Right, them, quote unquote, right, being the space or the indigenous populations, however you want to frame it. Both, actually. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Danny, do you have any questions or? Okay. One other thing, and then we can slowly get into maybe a break. We'll see. You brought up the idea of local involvement, right? Which I thought was very good, and of course plays into How Beautiful We Were. I don't, depending on how far you got, you may have seen this or not.
I read that they used the same tactic.
Yes, there. Right. So it's explicit in How Beautiful We Were, but again, it's classic neo-colonial hint handbook, right? And colonial handbook, by the way, right? Like we can talk about the distinction between the two, similar to how we talked about the distinction between liberal and neoliberal, but it's absolutely true. When the British were in India, for example, right, they had armies of indigenous bureaucrats, right, helping prop up empire, right, or the British Empire, with the promise that you were going to succeed in this new world order that the British were bringing, right, which to an extent was true, quote unquote, right? Like, yes, these local agents, right, so to speak, did technically succeed better, or were like viewed as, I guess, hierarchically above local people who did not engage with the politics of empire as explicitly. But also there was inevitably a cap, right? No one in the British army or British system expected a local Indian to actually, I don't know, make it to be the British Raj or anything like that, right? That would be inconceivable, right? So there is like a limitation to how far local involvement can go by the very structure of the system, but local involvement is necessary, right? You can never, no system has ever survived particularly long by purely imposing outside forces, except through genocide.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and this is where examples like Canada and the US come in, right? The British and French were able to take over so effectively because the local indigenous population was basically genocided, right? You don't see it as effectively in, I'll just use India again as an example, because they did not, they certainly tried, but the local population still survives, right, today. And so there was always some kind of active resistance. That's not to say that there isn't an active resistance from indigenous populations here today, right? But it was easier for the British to take over in that sense because of the politics of genocide. Right? Sorry, you looked like you were going to say something. Yeah. No. Okay. But yeah, so all that to say that this idea of local involvement is really interesting. And to take a contemporary example, I don't know how many of you have been following. How many of you, if either of you, have been following what's been happening in Venezuela, for example, recently, right? A little bit, right? So, sorry. Okay, sorry. So, for the past 20 years or so, there's been a broadly left-wing government, right? That was started by Hugo Chavez and now is under what's his name, Nicolas Maduro. And part of the strength of their government comes from the idea, and I guess this is particularly relevant for today, is the idea of keeping the income of oil, which is plentiful in Venezuela, right, for the Venezuelan people, right? Their government kind of has survived for the last 20 years on that promise, right? Whether or not they have actually accomplished that promise is another subject for debate, but like that's the rhetoric that is there, right? And recently, right, the person who won the Nobel Peace Prize, right, is the leader of the opposition in Venezuela, right? Who's a conservative, right? And part of her promises was, to tie into your presentation, to sell off trillions of dollars of oil to the American government, right? And so explicitly, still to this day, like this was weeks ago, in 2025, you see this element of local involvement with broader, in this case, American, but broadly speaking, like Western imperialist politics. Right? Here, channeled exclusively through oil, right? And what power, economic and political, oil brings. Yeah, I don't know if anyone has anything to add on that. It's just like a good example that I thought of that's much more fresh, I guess. That's quite literally in the news.
It's good to highlight that it's still a modern thing where exactly as you said, it wasn't just a maneuver that was used during the colonial age.
Not at all.
Whenever you invade a country, wherever it might be, you always need local compliance.
Yeah.
And in certain regions, you've had it in a more increased like numbers than others. Such as, for instance, like the difference between India and North America.
Absolutely. This was a book I brought here. It's from the 70s, so in some ways it's a little bit outdated, but part of the reason why I'm reading it is because it's shockingly not outdated. This is a book by Eduardo Galeano called Open Veins of Latin America, which is a bit dry at times, but by and large, if you want like a good example of these politics that Weilinen brings up through a literary lens, I think it's a good one to read. I think it's still in print. This is obviously a very old and beaten up copy, but there's a section here on that's called The Invisible Sources of Power. And I think that's a really good way of describing oil politics, right? Which, of course, he brings up in this section, and he calls it the black curse of petroleum. And I just want to read a section here because I think it ties a lot of what we were just talking about together. I'll just read a paragraph. Along with natural gas, petroleum is today the chief fuel that keeps our world in motion. It is a raw material of rising importance for the chemical industry and is the basic strategic material for military activities. Nothing compares with this quote-unquote black gold as a magnet for foreign capital. Nothing earns such lush profits. No jewel in the diadem of capitalism is so monopolized. And no businessmen wield the global political power of the great petroleum corporations. Standard Oil and Shell seat and unseat kings and presidents, which is absolutely true. Finance palace plots and coups d'etat. have innumerable generals, ministers, and James Bonds at their command, and make decisions about peace or war in every field, in every language. Standard Oil of New Jersey, now Exxon, is the capitalist world's biggest industrial enterprise. Outside the United States, no industrial enterprise has greater power than Shell. Affiliates sell cruel petroleum to subsidiaries which refine it and sell it to branch organizations for distribution. There is no loss of blood in the whole internal circulatory system of the cartel, which also owns the pipelines and most of the oil fleets on the 7 seas. Prices are manipulated on a world scale to keep taxes low and profits high. The crude petroleum gets constantly cheaper, the refined constantly more expensive. I really like that passage. There is no loss of blood in the whole internal circulatory system of this cartel, which ties in with the idea of like invisible sources of power, right? It's something that we don't necessarily see, right? And again, imperialism classic, right? Relied explicitly on violence, right? I used the example of genocide earlier, but there was constantly, even if it wasn't explicitly genocide, there was constantly the use of military force in order to maintain the power of whatever colonial power was there, right? British, Dutch, Portuguese, etc. And this, I guess, is a good transition to neocolonialism, right? Much like neoliberalism, the big distinction that people kind of see with neocolonialism versus colonialism classic, I should stop calling it that, that's a bit flippant, but like, is the fact that there's this greater separation, right, between the maneuvers of power, the levers of power, right, that profit from this extractive violence, right, and the actual violence that's being imposed, right? We don't see it as much. And granted, there's some news pieces about it, right? Whatever sweatshop is violent, or there's a protest that was put down violently by local armies or whatever. But by and large, the levers of violence are much more muted, right, in a neocolonial context, which, at least in some people's estimation, makes it all the more insidious, right? Because how do you actually fight or how do you get to resist such a power, right, when you can't actually point to the violence that it operates on, right? And again, this is more something that we're going to touch upon next week. But I think that's one of the major questions of planetary thought, right, or planetarity. Right? When we impose violence on the planet, how do you actually stop that? It's easy to fight comparatively easy to fight the British when you can directly point to violence that they did, right?
Yeah.
Oh, you shot someone? Great. I know why I'm fighting you, right? It's less easy to do that when you're like, oh, Standard Oil is extracting more oil. How do you fight that? You just take down Standard Oil, another company's going to take its place, right? That's not to be depressing, but it is like a thought that should be had, right? How do you actually tangibly resist such neocolonial operations? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
There was that part at the beginning
Please.
of the paragraph. What did it talk about again?
Oh, in the Open Veins book?
Yeah.
Along with natural gas, petroleum today is the fuel that keeps our world in motion.
Yeah.
This was written, by the way, just before the oil crisis that you brought up.
Hey, fun enough. At the beginning of the text as well, it states how oil, like petrol, is the number one source. Well, now we have cobalt that's competing with it, but still, oil is an indispensable source. And we know today that given the massive like technology advancements and research and whatever, that like they are very much capable of finding another source. If they're actually invested in it, they're capable of finding another source that can do the same things that oil can do. However, it goes to show that they have other interests in the regions that are rich in the oil.
Yeah.
It's not only for the oil, but they also have other interests.
I was to give a really good example of how we know of other ways of producing energy. If I were to ask you when the first electric car was made, when would you say? Like, what year would you give?
Oh yeah, it was actually much earlier than we think, right?
Like, just name a year, an estimate.
Wasn't it like in the 1900s, something like around the 40s, eh?
Oh, earlier than that.
Oh.
Really?
Oh yeah. So I was, oh, where was it? Was it in Alberta? Ironic. Alberta or Saskatchewan. I had done a trip a few years ago across Canada. I joined an uncle of mine who's a trucker, and we stopped in a little like car museum in like it was either the Canadian or American Midwest, I can't remember. Oil heartland, by the way. And yeah, there was this old electric vehicle from like 1902. Right.
Oh.
Now, granted, it did not have the like efficiency that we have today, right? But yeah, to say that we have no idea how to make this technology efficient is crap, right? Absolutely not true.
But it's like a whole thing now. Like whenever there's like it's like a whole social media thing where if there's like someone who's like, oh, I found a way to make my car run on water, then they'll be like, oh, it was nice knowing you. Like, oh, so sad you were depressed and killed yourself. Like, we kind of, that's the thing. It's sad because we kind of are all aware of it, but there's no way to actually confront it.
Okay, so I get the impulse, right? The no way to actually confront it. I like to be a little bit more hopeful in my life and say like, there is no such thing as not being able to confront something. Is it always effective in the way that we would like it? No.
I think
but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it.
It is confronted, but it is buried under the conspiracies, and that ridiculizes it.
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe.
No, I would think so. There's a reason why a lot of conspiracies revolve around, right, taking away your freedoms and associating it with like ecological changes, I guess, right? There's a whole conspiracy around like 15-minute cities, for example, right? I don't know if you've seen that one, but like this idea that, and it's often pushed by very far right people, but this idea that 15-minute cities, which by and large would be pretty good for most people, is it going to solve all our problems? No, but it would be like a good step in the right direction. Is a way of containing people into like a ghettos type of thing, right? And that it would remove whatever freedoms we have, or so on and so forth. So yeah, you do explicitly see this kind of tying together through half-assed conspiracy theories. Good. It's a little bit past 9:30. Do we want to take like a couple minutes break and then come back? Yeah. Okay. You seem very tired today.
Sorry. Yeah. I'm here, but I'm like, yeah.
When we come back, I have music, because of course I do. That kind of demonstrates this neocolonialism that we're getting at, and then I want to get into the book.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna go get myself a coffee.
How many?
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
So I'm sorry.
It's all good. Yeah. It happens.
Yeah.
How about you, a vibe check? How's it going for the end of the semester? Is vibe check still a thing? I don't know. Who's to say, really? Yeah. What other classes are you taking? I don't think I ever asked.
I have a class after, and this is my
Mhm.
second time running into the prof. It's like his office is open, and I don't want to go to class, but it's weird because he saw me twice now, and it's right after.
Oh, you're taking Alex's drama class?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's over. You have to go now. But now that you know where his office is, you could just like go around. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's a
You have
vibe.
to take the other elevator.
Exactly. Always the other elevator.
Because as soon as you get out of
Because
that one,
all
it's
the English profs are like there, right? So yeah, you have to.
Weird. I haven't for 2 classes, and I feel like he hates me, but I don't know how to. It's weird coming into class.
Yeah, it's fine. Do you at least like the class? You just don't.
Like I think we had a disagreement over like one text, and then from there on, everything became weird. And he keeps like, I don't know, whenever he goes to class, he always makes these comments where he's like, "Don't put your teacher in an antagonizing position with you," and then he looks at me, and I'm like, "What did I do?"
If it helps, I don't think it's at you specifically. I don't know how much you can hear from. I don't think it's you specifically. I think just that's just the way that he speaks. I've had that vibe from him before, and I know for a fact that he doesn't hate me. So yeah, I think it's just the way that he presents.
I don't know. We were talking about August Wilson. He's like a famous playwright.
Yeah.
And like I think that his pieces are like, because historically like, he's been very pro like the Black civil movement, and I think that his pieces are like anchored in that. Like I don't
What
know.
did he
Like,
write again? What did he write again? Oh, Ma Rainey's Black Bomb. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And like I feel like every character represents like a different like facet of the Black civil movement. But
Sure.
you have like the Pan-Africanism, you have the ones that are like, let me just live my life as is, and then you have the ones that are like that think that like they can make it into like the American dream, like
Sure.
they don't see, they think that they can make it there. And I don't know, and like he just like refuted all of that.
Right.
And I think it's sad that we always like this is something that Malcolm X always talks about, where like, you know, white people, like they're political, like important people they're actually politicized people who have like done things, whereas like when it comes to like Black art, like all they are is just like art, like they can't be more than art. Like you have like musicians and like painters that are like at the forefront of the movement. You don't have actual politicians, and that's the way they want it. They want like a music artist to be able to represent the entirety of the Black civil movement. When it's not that way, you need politicians at the forefront, like in other movements.
That's interesting.
It's sad that we always strip like every Black artist's work as purely art and like we derive it from politics when it's not the case.
I don't know. I think generally you're right in that. Where it comes to Alex's feelings about this, I'm not. I obviously can't speak for him. I would ask him directly, but having had conversations about him with him about like Black politics in the theater and all of that, I think he is aware of this. So I don't know if in this particular circumstance he just genuinely doesn't see it, right? But I think by and large you are correct in your assessment of how people engage with Black art.
Yeah.
There's I get that similar feel with.
It can't be separated from the sufferance of the Black people.
I mean, some of it can.
Yeah, but not Wilson's work.
Wilson, I would agree. Yeah. You get that similar vibe. Have either of you seen Sinners recently?
No.
Yeah, it's good. You should see it if you like horror. It's like a campy horror movie, but same idea, right? It's an explicitly political movie, right? And the director of it, the same guy who did Black Panther, the first one. Oh, damn it! What's his name?
So bad names.
Ryan Coogler?
That's it. Yeah, Ryan Coogler. Right. He is outspoken about Black art and stuff like that, and there is such a weird counter discourse that's like, no, it's just a vibes movie. When like the movie is so explicitly political and he's explicitly political in his views, and it's okay that you get other meanings out of this work, right? That's the point of art, is that you get a variety of perspectives on it, right? That's literally the point. But yeah, to completely sidestep any desire to see any kind of politics, whether you agree with them or not, in an art that is explicitly political is beyond me. It kind of baffles me.
It's always reoccurring. They love to depoliticize black work.
You see it often in black work. I feel like that's also as a generalized sentiment that we have towards art. Right? You see this a lot in people's overall what's the term I'm looking for? Like lack of critical reading skills, right? That's kind of generally on the way down. I think it's been exaggerated to what extent, but generally on the way down. And yeah, just I see it all the time in just the people around me who are like, no, it's just a normal thing. I'm like, how? How do you just see this as a normal thing, right?
Real talk though, I'm scared it's actually affected my grades. I got a grade back this morning, and like funny enough, it's like the second I saw it, I feel like he just submitted it. And like I got 10 points off because he said that I didn't respect the structure.
Oh, that's
5-paragraph structure, but 10 points is a little crazy.
Yeah, that you can disagree with, but yeah.
That was the only like point, like no other comments. Like you didn't respect the 5 structure, 10 points off. I didn't get it. I was like, okay.
Having TA'd for Alex before,
yeah,
I absolutely guarantee that he has nothing against specific students.
Are you sure?
I've rarely been more sure of anything in my life.
That's a little reassuring.
There are teachers who you should be. I shouldn't say that while I'm recording. There are teachers that are perhaps like that.
I think
me. No, but not Alex. No.
But that very same teacher, it was really embarrassing. Like the first day of class, I didn't know she was a teacher. I missed the first class, and I thought she was a student because we were waiting outside. The class was occupied, and my friend comes, and I'm like, "Oh my god! Like it's this like post-colonial class, and I was so looking forward to it." And the first reading is like the hate you give, and I was basically like kind of criticizing it, and I was like, out of everything, like you have like Achebe, you have like Platano, like there's so many like good works, and then she just like turned and she goes like, if you had been here the first class, you would know why I picked that text. And then I just dropped the class. I was like, I can't come back here.
That's it. It's over.
I can't come back here.
Yeah. I've never been in that position.
Never talk outside of class. You never know where the teacher is.
That is 100% true.
I learned that lesson the hard way.
Art ears are everywhere. Yeah. No, it's fine. Say what you will, but yeah, it's. All that to say, I think you're safe with Alex. Again, just from vibes and experience. Anyway.
No.
How beautiful we were. Yeah, so I wanted to play a song because I'm obsessed with music, so why not? There's no lyrics, unfortunately, but there are lyrics, but I can't show you the lyrics because the way that they're not on Spotify, basically, for this particular song. But I think the vocals are clear enough that you don't need them. This is a song by an artist called Moor Mother, Moor Moor, right? So the North African peoples. Have any of you heard of her before? Moor Mother? No, not Moors specifically, but yeah, Moors maybe with Othello, but
yeah.
Moor Mother, no. Okay. Very contemporary artist, interested in blending kind of industrial sounds with hip hop, and in this case, she re-recorded an older album of hers with an orchestra, basically. Right? So completely reframes her industrial hip hop to more like classical sensibilities, and I think it works in a really interesting way, especially for the lyrics that she's going with, right? Which, as you might expect, are explicitly neo-colonial or against neo-colonialism in this case, I should say. Okay, so this is from her album Analog Fluids of Sonic Black Holes, which is a fantastic title, and this is the song called Shadowgrams.
I used to live here. I saw flowers over here, all the sweat tears. According to you, she's never here to stop them. You will never hear, you still will hear. They travel inside your time. Drinking water from the bed, they don't tell you that you've been drinking it all your life. Sleeping on the bed, the bed bugs, and it's not the queen. It's not the queen that said no, it was so she can sleep at night. It's not the president who will always vote for the demise of life, liberty, and justice. And he said, yes, we can. Yes, we can. Can you destruct them? Can you go? Can you I said, yes, they can. And they killed
We'll stop it there because that's the transition into the next song. What do we think?
I like it.
I literally heard that like 2 days ago, and I was like, "Shit, I need to play this." I had the whole class lined out, and I had my notes, and I was like,
What's the
"Ah."
name?
So it just started Private Life, but Shadowgrams was the one I just played. How does this tie into How Beautiful We Were? There's a few ways that we can kind of like enter in from this song. We can even make connections from last week, right?
Mhm.
I would argue. So, how do we go from More Mothers, Shadowgrams, to How Beautiful We Were?
Well, she does brush over the corrupt, the ones that sell their
When you
lands.
say she, who are you talking about?
More
Oh, yeah.
mother.
Mhm.
She brushes over the people who sell out their people and their lands,
Sorry.
because she says like, you want more money.
Yep.
Like, you're promised more money.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's relevant to our part of the how.
Yeah. More money, more money, more money. Hold on. I think I have no, it's fine. I think I have a passage on this. 3 decades before. Where was that? I was making my notes with a digital copy of the book because I didn't have it with me on the at that moment, and I think the pages that I highlighted are not the same as in my actual physical copy. Hold on. It's a part where they're like 3 decades before we were sold to Pexton or something like that. I had page 13, so it should be right around there. Here we go. Yeah, so page 11 of my copy. Just below the section that begins on most nights, there's a little section there.
Yeah.
Their words would have served no purpose but to further instill within us that we couldn't undo the fact that 3 decades before, in Bizum, on a date we'll never know, at a meeting where none of us was present, our government had given us to Pexton, handed on a sheet of paper our land and waters to them. We would have no choice but to accept that we were now theirs. We would have admitted to ourselves that we'd long ago been defeated. So it starts off, the book, this is like obviously 10 pages into the book, but it starts off on a really dour note, right? We have been in this situation for years. In this case, it's decades, but arguably centuries, right? Depending on when you want to make this start. So structurally, this is a really interesting, I guess, point for the novel. It almost frames it as, an anti-tragedy. Right? We talked about this a few weeks ago when Marcio was giving his presentation on Weak Planet, right? And he brought up the idea of tragedy, where usually it's the idea of a hero falling in some kind. And in this case, we're not falling; we have already fallen. Right, at this point in the novel.
What was the word we were working on that week? Oh, was it? It was the tiger flu, because it was after the...
Was it the first week of tiger flu?
Apocalypse.
Yes. Yeah, that would make sense. So yeah, first week of tiger flu. Yeah. Thank you. You're the one who remembered it. Yeah. And I brought up the lyrics here. I found them online, but you get a sense of the same thing in the song with at the end when she says the end keeps happening, right? And the end is happening and it keeps happening, and you keep checking the clock as if time ever protected you. You keep checking the clock. Does it say doomsday? Does it say Father, for I have sinned? Does it say where they lynched Eve or where they buried Harriet? Harriet Tubman in this case, in case you were wondering of the reference. They have killed our heroes and we forget their names and call out into the void. I have no nationality. I was never born. And when you think about it, the nice white people in the mansion up on the hill, they own the sky. You know your daddy and them. Daddy, can we watch them die on Easter? Daddy, can I cut the ribbon? Daddy, can I go to the demolition? You know it. Ain't no home after the rich. Ain't no home after the rich. I just wanted to repeat that because sometimes it can be a little bit hard to understand the lyrics over the music. Good. There's a... Sorry, you looked like you were going to...
Ain't no home after the rich.
Uh-huh.
It's like, because like in the novel, they're kind of, well, where I'm at least, they're realizing that they've been lied to. But up until like recently, at least they were like promised, what was the word? I think it was prosperity.
Yes.
And like progress and like a nice quality of life. And it's like they're waiting for that to happen until they're lied to.
Yeah.
And then they realize they're lied to and it's too late. There's no home anymore because it's destroyed and it's killing them.
And again, structurally, and this is why most of my notes for today take place in like the first 50 pages or so, is because it's so dense on setup, even if it's not explicitly so. And what the novel really does in the first few pages is kind of get at that, right? You start off with the realization of the lie, right? We should have known the end was near. We could not have known. How could we not have known when the sky began to pour acid and rivers began to turn green, and this whole apocalyptic scenario that they're describing? And what was I going to say? But then you figure out, or most of those early pages basically tell you how that lie was constructed, right?
Yeah.
How could we not have known? And then she answers that question, right? With the 3 decades before. I have 3 passages that I had highlighted for like the systemic element of it. In the song, she talks about it with the references to Obama. If you caught that one, hold on. When she says, "Yes, we can."
Oh yeah.
You were maybe a little bit young for that, but that was his catchphrase, or his slogan, I should say. And it's not the queen. It's not the queen. That 10 million is so we stay awake, so she can sleep at night. It's not the president who always vote for the demise of life, liberty, and justice. And they schools taught us we don't exist. But he said, yes, we can. Keep you distracted, keep you dumb, keep you dead, keep you isolated, keep you away, keep you bombed, and no one will notice because they control the music and they killed art. Right? That's why I pointed to you when she said that. I was like, but it is exactly that, right? It's like, and this was not planned that way. It's just like a good coincidence. On our
relative to class discussion.
Yes, there you go. It all comes back at the end, right? If there's one thing that we manage to do is always make it make sense. So this whole idea of keeping you distracted and so on, right? This connection between politicians, schools, art, right? It may seem dystopian, and when it works well, it can work well, right? Like the idea of public education, for example, is, I think, a good one by and large, right? I think it's better that the government is in charge of education rather than some soulless private corporation, right? But that's not to say that you can't be critical of how that actually perpetuates certain ideas, or ideals, I should say. Go ahead, Aya.
When she says because they control the music and they killed arts, that's extremely relevant because I feel like nowadays, like, music is artless.
If you want the lyrics.
I feel like music is artless and the lyrics are not as profound. Like, they're not just like the mainstream music. I mean, like, the lyrics are not profound. It's very it's very superficial, and it's also like it ties into the whole when like they keep you distracted, they keep you dumb, they keep you dead. It's actually a whole theory. It's like the Roman theater theory, where when they started like revolting and questioning the legitimacy of the emperor. Well, they created the theaters, they entertained the masses, they
Bread
did
and
shows.
Bread and games.
Yeah. And it's applicable till this day. Like they keep you dumb, they keep you dead with all this like Hollywood nonsense. Yeah, I think I like that part.
Yeah, I think actually, funny enough, because it does tie back to literature, I think this idea of bread and games, I think it's Shakespeare who coined that one.
Is it?
Yeah, that's not to say that they didn't do it.
I like my boy Shakespeare.
No, like look, I said this class number one. If we forget Shakespeare, just like close up the doors. We've called an end to the English literary department. It's over. No more. But that's not to say that you're wrong, right? And that the Romans didn't actually do this just because Shakespeare coined a term. But this idea of using political power, right, in that particular way is, I think, very true. Right. Good. Yeah. So the other example that I had taken for that was the section where they said Paxton and the government are your friends. So this would have been a few pages before the 3 decades before quote I pulled. So that was on page 11, so a little bit before. I had it on page 9 of that copy, so probably around page 7 or something like that.
That phrasing pissed me off. Like, friends. Like, they keep repeating it. They're like, like pushing that narrative. But, like, obviously from the reader's perspective, we know, like, how, sorry, but, like, how shitty they are.
Yeah.
So it's like...
Just swear in class.
And it's recorded too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's not this one, but I just saw it here. This is on page 6 of my version. This is Wojciechowski talking. Continue looking at us, dreadful gums still exposed, and like this weird creepy smile that he has. We wished we didn't have to look at them, but there could be no avoidance. They were the first thing we saw whenever we looked at his face. Gums as black as the night's most evil hour, streaked with pink in various shades, tilting brown teeth, wide spaces between. My very dear people, he went on, even a sheep knows how to tell its master what it wants. That's why we've gathered here again, to resume this discourse. We thank the kind representatives from Paxton for coming back to talk to us. Messengers are good, but why should we use them if we can talk to each other with our own mouths? There's been a lot of misunderstanding, but I hope this meeting will bring us closer to a resolution of our mutual suffering. I hope after this evening we and Paxton can continue moving in the direction of becoming good friends. Friendship is a great thing, isn't it? So again, that's not the point.
But on the next page, on the middle of page 7, they're like...
Oh, there it is.
Yeah. Paxton and the government are your friends, the leader said. Even on your worst day, remember that we're thinking about you in Bism and working hard for you. For you.
For you.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's... This is why I think we should have rhetoric classes again, because it's not something we do except maybe in like communication degrees or anything like that. But this is a really good example of rhetoric. Do we know what I mean when I say rhetoric? Like in the classical sense? Ish. Right? The construction of a speech, basically, right? Or the way that you structure your arguments. Right? Typically, it was used in political speech, right? But it can be used in an essay, right? It's the way that you formulate your arguments and structure your thoughts in a way to make them as impactful as possible. Okay? To come back to the Shakespeare example, in Julius Caesar, there's an excellent use of rhetoric by, is it Brutus? Who makes the whole speech in the middle after? Yeah. So it's Brutus who makes this whole speech after Julius Caesar has been stabbed, right? And he rouses the crowd back to his side, right? He has just killed the leader of the Roman Republic, and he's like, no, okay, well, let's bring it back to me, and we'll bring it back to our side, again, if you want a perfect example of rhetoric, just look at that. You can, and actually this ties in even better. We talked about Paradise Lost last week. Was it
Milton's Paradise?
Yeah, Milton's Paradise Lost. It wasn't explicit. We talked about it through Swamp Thing. So not last week, the week before. Yeah, Satan has the best lines in Paradise Lost, and they're the best because they're so rhetorically powerful, right? He manages to convince you to his side and convince you that he's actually the justified and antagonized figure in that story, right? Right, the literal figure of evil, right? However you want to qualify it, is also the most convincing in that text, and it's because of his rhetorical capacities. And you see a very similar thing here with the repetition of friends, right, and of kind language, right? My very dear people, we all like friends. We're all doing this for our benefit, right? The repetition of kind, dear, messengers are good. We want to resolve mutual suffering. Friendship is a great thing. And so on and so forth. Like, these are just some of the examples from that one paragraph, right? But this is a rhetorical move. It lulls people into a sense of security, and it works, by the way, right? Whenever we think, oh, we're all university students, we're all too smart for this, right? It works on the whole point is that it works, right? Why do people still follow someone like Donald Trump? Is because he's shockingly good at that kind of thing, right? His rhetoric is engrossing. It's awful, and I shouldn't say on a recording what I think should happen to Donald Trump, but like, rhetorically speaking, and within the context of, like,
he's able to convince.
Right, exactly. There's a reason why it's so convincing, right? So I think when we're talking about keep you distracted, keep you dumb, keep you dead, it is a rhetorical thing that you see from the start, right? Yeah. Go ahead. You looked like you were going to say something.
No, I think it's the only reason why he is in power. It's because he kept his people dumb.
Okay, so wait, are you talking about Trump or
Trump?
Okay. But so I guess the leader, right, in the text, I guess this would be more a question for Diany, although you might have an answer, yeah. Why is he in power?
He's the son of the last leader.
Yeah, so there's a hierarchical thing, right? It's also implied. There's also, like, other implications, right, for why he's still in power aside from nepotism and just primogeniture.
Not true.
Do you think he would still be in power if he didn't play ball?
Probably not.
I don't think so. And again, I think it's more implied than anything else, right? I don't remember, or at least I didn't highlight a passage where it's explicitly said, but I don't. Whenever I read parts of him, parts of the leader's speeches in How Beautiful We Were, I never get the sense that he was actually speaking from a point of his own thoughts and what he genuinely believes, right? It was always as a kind of puppet, right, for the Paxton men. Again,
no, I get that.
I wouldn't necessarily bank an entire, like, essay on this, right? Because it's more interpretative than anything else. It's more implicit. But I think if you read enough between the lines or know anything about kind of what the history we are talking about here, you do get that sense, at least for me. So yeah, primogeniture and playing ball, I guess. At least that's how I was seeing it. Okay, one last quote.
It would fit in the, I guess, presentation of, like, the idea that if it hadn't been him, they would have manipulated someone else, like tossed him away.
But you see that, I guess, spoiler for if you haven't gotten that, like, when they do capture the Paxton men,
Hmm.
right?
That was the plan of the grieving father.
Mhm. Right. So when they do capture the Paxton men, the first thing that the leader does is like try to mediate this,
Yeah.
right? And
Oh no, this looks bad for my baby.
yeah, exactly. It looks bad for everyone. Like they're being magnanimous with, they help they help our village, right? And it's so good. It brings money and blah blah blah. That whole thing. And yet it's not quite true. A really good passage. This is on page 5. This little section here that starts, "We inhaled, waited, exhaled," I think kind of captures what we're talking about here. We inhaled, waited, exhaled. We remembered those who had died from diseases with neither names nor cures. Our siblings and cousins and friends who had perished from the poison in the water and the poison in the air and the poisoned food growing from the land that lost its purity the day Paxton came drilling. We hoped the men would look into our eyes and feel something for us. We were children, like their children, and we wanted them to recognize that. If we did, it wasn't apparent in their countenance. They'd come for Paxton to keep its conscience clean. They hadn't come for us. So, well, obviously you get the sense in the last sentence, right? They come for Paxton to keep their conscience clean. They hadn't come for us.
Yeah.
But this passage, I bring it up also because it's a really interesting dichotomy between this long-lasting land that has been around for billions of years, presumably, right? Millions at the very least, and just the immediacy of its loss, right, for the people who are there, right? And it's something we've brought up a few times in the context of this class, but the way that I guess deep time, right? This long-lasting land, or longue durée, if you want to use the French term that's sometimes used, of the land, and how extractive practices, right, like the ones that we were talking about since the beginning, tend to immediately transform these geologies and geographies, right? This is something that we talked about briefly in relation to Fredouard's poems, right, when we talked about the pictograms. And it's something that we're going to cover a little bit more explicitly next week with Catherine Yusuf's text on geology, race, and matter, right? Which may have been a better text to put in with Fredouard's poems, but whatever. That's neither here nor there at this point. But this kind of tying together of the way that we exploit land and we exploit people and we exploit things, right, is central to Yusuf's concern, right, in that text. But it can also, I think, and she kind of hints at this, it can be also a source for resistance and renewal of better practices. Right? Okay, I feel like I'm going into a different direction, so I'll stop before I go too crazy. Anything we want to add or emphasize or talk about?
That passage does remind me of Barad's text we read on representationalism and performativity.
Yeah.
Because it's like diseases with neither names nor cures.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like by not acknowledging that what they're going through, like by not naming what they're going through, they kind of are able to just ignore it and pretend it doesn't happen.
Exactly.
So like naming here would have some sort of power or impact. It does like perpetuate the slow violence or like justify the slow violence they're
absolutely
from.
Absolutely. We can tie it back into the leader thing. Just 2 paragraphs down, when they start, "We did not respond," we get an element of performativity, right, to tie it back in with what you were saying about Barad. Performativity in the fact that he's ascribed the term leader, right, and he acts that way, but does he really perform that? Probably not. In the way that we assume leadership to happen, right? We did not respond. We cared for nothing. We cared nothing for what he had to say. We knew he was one of them. We'd known for years that though he was our leader, descended from the same ancestors as us, we no longer meant anything to him. Paxton had bought his cooperation. Oh, okay, so I guess they do say it explicitly. Paxton had bought his cooperation, and he had in turn sold our future to them. We'd seen with our own eyes, heard with our own ears how Paxton was fattening his wives and giving his sons jobs in the capital and handing him envelopes of cash, etc., etc., etc. Right? So, tying back into Barad's idea of representationalism, right? You're representing this figure through the term leader, but his actual actions completely disavow this. Right? Good. Aya, do you have anything you wanted to add, or is that good? I wanted to come back to the deliberately unplaced term that you had brought up in your presentation, and let's see if I can actually find it.
What term?
You maybe I just paraphrased it. Also, when you were talking in relation to cities of salt, you said something along the lines of being deliberately unplaced.
Forced displacement.
Forced displacement, right? Okay. And there's something that I think is worth unpacking with the notion of place.
Yeah.
Right.
Under the Geneva Conventions is a war crime, so.
Okay, no, so unpack that a bit. What do you mean? Right, so like I was going to ask, what do we mean by place? Because it's a loaded term in and of itself. But what do you mean? What were you thinking of when you were talking about the Geneva Convention?
Oh, nothing. I just.
Oh, okay.
I thought it was funny how because it's discussed at length in all the works in this and as well in the novel, and we seem to forget that it is actually a war crime. It's just because it's been done so many times that now it's not considered one anymore.
Right, to displace someone. Yeah. Good. So yes.
So what was the question?
What do we understand by place? Because sometimes we conflate it with space.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's quite the same thing.
No.
Right. There are some circumstances where they can kind of be tied together, but generally I think it's worth separating up. Right. So when we use the term place, and I have a passage that I'm going to pull after, but I wanted to set the groundwork here. What do we understand? Is it concrete, abstract, conceptual?
I think it's concrete. I think it's as evident as they have her village. They've placed themselves in a convenient space where they can that ensures their survival. Like a body of water, agricultural land, things of this sort. So yeah, it is a place that they've installed themselves in, and they depend on that space for survival.
Good. So there is the concrete version of literal areas.
Yeah.
Right. We are currently in Montreal. Right. It is a place with clearly defined borders. Right. There is a place where Montreal begins and ends, and then Brossard starts, or whatever. Right. Or Laval begins, and so on and so forth. Good. So, and our way of acting and understanding ourselves is often tied to that place, right? Which is why people associate so much importance to it. Okay. Is there a way that it can be more abstract?
In what sense would it become abstract?
Well, that's what I'm asking, I guess. Is there a sense in which it could also be abstracted?
I don't see it. Do you need to see it? I'm not sure.
If you go, say, on vacation to France.
Ew.
Yeah, whatever. Ew.
Sorry.
It's just such a visceral reaction.
You caught me by surprise.
Wherever. Right? Go,
No,
go on vacation to Vietnam or whatever. Australia,
speak to
some other.
friends. Sorry. Need to control myself.
Just immediately slandering the French. It's so good.
The small group allows for that.
Yeah, exactly.
No, but it's a whole thing. Like whenever you ask someone like if they could get rid of a place, everyone's like, France gotta go.
Ah,
France gotta
in
go.
my circle of friends, it's like Great Britain. Not just specifically England. Leave like Scotland and all of the others, but specifically
No, leave Ireland.
Yeah, exactly. So just England.
Britain. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, Scotland, Ireland, maybe not Northern Ireland. I don't know.
Yeah, they. Oh, speaking of selling yourself to the colonizers, the loyalists. What are they called? The loyalists.
The Ulster loyalists. Mm-hmm. Sure. Uh-huh.
That's good too.
Yep. Oh yeah, great stuff. Anyway,
we're back in France.
We're back. So whatever. You go on vacation, right? Somewhere. Do you still consider yourself a Montrealer? If someone asks, where are you from? Right? Do you still consider yourself, do you say Canada? Mm-hmm. Do you say Montreal? Do you say Quebec?
Yeah, I'll say Quebec.
You say Quebec? So suddenly your place changes. Right? Whereas if you're in Quebec and someone asks, where are you from?
Yeah, I'd say.
Right? You'd say, I don't know, Brassard or whatever. Oh. But, I don't know what the answer, right? Or Quebec. Or Libya, right? Exactly, right? So your sense of place is very contingent, right? At the end of the day, right? Mm-hmm. And in concrete terms, yes, right? We do tie a lot of importance to specific locales, right? But those associations do dissipate rather quickly, right? And you don't need to go far for that, right? I am someone who's generally indifferent to the differences between Canada and America, for example. I think that there's a lot of similarities that generally we don't acknowledge, right? But as soon as I go abroad, I'm like, no, I'm Canadian. Like that, I will refuse to associate myself with Americans, right? Not out of any like genuine sense of recognition that there is a difference, but because I know that there is a global association with those differences.
Even for your own safety. Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but yeah, actually. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, I'm not going to get into it, but yes. I was like, oh, do I go down that rabbit hole? No. I will withhold. And so I think on page 29, there's a particularly informative passage that gets at this sense of what exactly is place in the context of the novel. I say page 29 on my version. It's the page that begins one evening when I'm 5, while sitting on the veranda. It's the start of a new section. It's a bit of a longer passage, but I think I can read the whole paragraph because there's so much to unpack as far as place is concerned and other stuff that I wanted to bring up in relation to space, perhaps, and the differences that we can make there. One evening when I'm 5, while sitting on the veranda with Papa, I ask him why the oil fields and surrounding dwellings for Pexton's laborers are called gardens, though there's not a single flower there. Papa thinks for a while, chuckles, and says, well, gardens is a different sort of garden. Pexton is a different sort of gardener. The oil is their flower. I ask Papa if the pipelines that begin in gardens have an end. They seem to run on forever, wrapping around our village and passing over the big river, through our farms and deep into the forest. The end nowhere in sight. Papa tells me that everything that has a beginning also has an end. In the case of the pipelines, they start at the oil wells and end in a faraway town many hours away by bus, a town near the ocean. There, Papa says, the oil is put into containers and sent overseas to that place called America. So America here is described as a place, right, in the concrete sense, to the people, but it's never said explicitly in which country it is. I think there's a few references throughout that kind of indicate it's broadly in West Africa, right? But so to the people in the village in Kasava, is it Kasava? Yes. Kasawa, sorry, not Kasava. To people in Kasawa, right, America is a place over there, right? They can technically imagine. So in that sense, it's very concrete. Right? It is a place with borders, and it is a specific place where that oil is shipped to. Right? To do what with? Power cars, and et cetera, and so forth. Right? But there's also a sense in which America is an abstract place, right, in this passage. I'll leave it over to you. How is America abstracted here? In what way does America become an idea more than an actual place in a passage like this one, and even throughout the novel? It's not necessarily it's a question that we've kind of tangentially answered throughout, but I just wanted to put it in an example here. In what way is America more than a concrete place in passages like this? Or other passages?
Not sure.
Uh-huh.
But like when we talked about frontiers and how it's like the space past the border, it's kind of, it seems to be like something that's unreachable for them, or that's past their
good good
I don't know, attainable land.
Yeah, for sure. In both ways, by the way, right? So for the people of Kosawa, right, it is this kind of unattainable other place, right, out there, outside of our normal expectations. Yeah. And as the paragraph afterwards makes clear, America, whether that's true or not, comes with certain set of assumptions. When you think America, you think this, that, and the other, right? Her papa went to America, right? And she asks him about it, right? This school that has 7,000 people, right? So these large places with lots of people. Everyone in a car in America has cars, right? Of course you can own a car. Why not? Just make sure you buy a big one so that you can use it to take me hunting and blah, 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 right? There's these ideals that is associated with America. Right?
I find it interesting how it's a place where time doesn't unfold in the same way as it does in Kosawa.
Say more about that. Yeah.
It's like
I think you're right.
The hours over there go by so fast that people need cars to get to places quickly.
Yes.
And do everything before the sun goes.
Yeah. And it's true, right? In a certain sense. How many people do you see just walking around just so quickly? I mean, I walk around quickly because I have long legs, but also like we're in a real rush to get to places, right? All the time.
Yeah.
And this is a generalization, but whenever I've been to other countries, you do see a much lower emphasis on this kind of rush. I feel, at least. Maybe you can disagree with me on that, but whenever I've gone to North Africa or
You've gone to North Africa?
I have.
Where have you been?
I've been to Egypt. My dad's...
Yeah, there's no sense of urgency there.
No. Even South America. Like my family's from Egypt, so...
What?
Yeah. I know I look like the whitest person alive, but... but yeah, my My dad's side of the family is from Egypt and Lebanon.
Oh,
Yeah. But yeah, my mom's side is from Britain. I'm like the ultimate colonial baby. Um, what was I going to say? I shouldn't say that. My mom listens to this sometimes. um, no. But yeah, or even when when I've been to South America, right? There's this sense of urgency is just not as present, right? As when you're in the U.S. or when you're in other parts of Canada, right? Um, I've had that sense in Italy as well, right? It's just a completely different vibe in most parts of the world, right? So yeah, in the most abstract sense, I think you're absolutely correct. Like time, this thing that should be the great unifier, right? Everyone in the world has a clock, right? That follows the same technical patterns, right? We're even so obsessed with time that we've separated up regions of the world along like meridian time, right? And yet our actual engagement with that time is completely different from one to another, right? Which is, of course, something that we've brought up in relation to deep time and so on, right?
But it does encourage this idea that it's so foreign and different. And
Good.
I've woken up. I'm here now. This part of class.
See, there you go. All you needed was
I'm back.
Yeah. Talk of good old American oil. So there's that, but especially in that following passage, right? All of the associations that they're making as well with cars, school, right? You can make it big. You have freedom, right? All of these things are core elements of the American dream, right? The great myth of North America, right? Which was maybe true for like 10 minutes somewhere in the 1950s, right? Maybe. And even then, not for everyone. So again, this idea of tying America, this concrete place, to a wider ideal is worth highlighting here, right? And especially an ideal that is so explicitly tied, in this case, to oil. Right? The American dream and oil form one. At least for the people of Kosala. Does that make sense, right? This distinction between concrete and abstract place?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. By the way, again, just because I'm always down to tell you things like this, that's like an easy way to make points in class, right? Or if ever you're like suffering about like what to write about for an essay, you can probably make a pretty good like undergrad or even graduate style essay talking about race, space, or place, right? Those three rhymes, right? Race, space, place. Unpacking that in a text, great. You've got your essay right there, right? Okay, so that being said, how do we differentiate place in this case as an abstract or concrete thing from space? So there are two different terms, of course. Duh. Then how do we distinguish the two? And again, we can look to this passage as a good example of how space is considered. By the way, it's like 10:45, so I was probably just like going to power through and finish a little bit earlier instead of taking a second break. How do we understand space in relation or in distinction to place? And I would point you specifically to the discussion of gardens and the pipelines in that passage here. I think that gives you a good indication of what that means.
The only thing I can think of is like how like in my head like place feels like land while space, but I don't know like what that does or if that's what happens.
I think you can really use a good example of the borders, right? And again, I hate. I keep coming back to Heart of Darkness as an example, but it offers a good counterpoint, especially for this novel, right? Or actually, we talked about the tiger flu. We talked about different spaces, right? The way that people imagine, right, an area, right, is usually space, right? In Heart of Darkness, it takes the form of the map that's being filled in. It's a very quick passage at the start of the novella where he's like, "Oh, this map is being slowly colored in, right, by different colonial powers, right? That space, right, that is imagined, that Africa is imagined to be, right, or different spaces, I should say, different colonial outposts, different imperial centers." Is slowly colored in like a coloring book, right? In a more contemporary sense, right? Canada is formed up of different spaces, right? Again, often it's much more abstract. So Quebec is a space that we technically imagine along these specific borders, right? But Quebec as a place is a little bit more land focused. I think you're right, Liane, right? And Canada is a wider space, right, that has these areas that is then broken up into different provinces and territories. But then it's also broken up into different time zones, right? So do we identify space as a time zone, as a geographic location, right? But it is generally considered to be a kind of broad area that we can coalesce different ideals into, right? Whereas place tends to be a little bit more specific, right? Tends to. Again, you could probably argue otherwise in this case. I'm just telling you like the generalized view that people have. Right?
I feel like
Yeah, go ahead.
I feel like place
Yeah.
is like, for instance, like the village. It's like somewhere that holds like memories, lives, livelihood, things of the sort. And I feel like so like the company, Hexen, it's a space.
Yes.
It's like a space is invadable, a space is unoccupied. They see it as like a big void that they can like pick and select from. They don't see it as a place of residence. Good.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. Yeah. And again, to use a different example than Heart of Darkness, you see this in Tiger Flu, right? Different spaces, right? The world has been separated up into different spaces, different quarantine zones, right, that are engaged with differently, right? To the multinational corporations, I should say, in the Tiger Flu, there are certain zones that are highly exploitable, right? To use your example, to other people, let's say the Grist sisters, those spaces become places, right? Where they can live, thrive, or create new forms of existence, right? Space, space in the most abstract sense, space, the final frontier, right? Again, becomes perhaps a place by the end of the Tiger Flu, right? With its use of Aang, who survives at the end, right? The satellite, right? And again, you can kind of argue whether or not Aang is a place because it's all digital and whatever, right? But you see this a lot in actually digital talk, right? The digital space that is the internet, right? It's much more malleable, it's much more flexible. You don't quite know where it begins and ends, but it's there. You can clearly identify it, right? Or clearly identify it as identifiable as it is. The mind, I think we talked about this. I don't know if you were there last in that specific class when we talked about it. The mind is often called like an inner space, right? Which is a like very radical way of thinking about your mind. Right? It's simultaneously something you can identify, but where does it begin and end? Right?
Mhm.
You can imagine infinity, but can you count to infinity? Right?
So you say that space is anything that cannot be limited?
Well, that's the contradiction of space, right? Is that people can imagine it, so it inevitably is a delimit or has some kind of delimitation, but it's never as strict as we tend to imagine place to be.
Yeah.
Right. That's why I think your example of how Paxton identifies an area versus how the villagers identify an area is interesting here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any other questions about that? Okay, good. So that means to come back to Weiland's text. How did I put it here? Yeah. So yeah, you talked about liminal spaces, right? These kind of in between spaces. That's what liminal means. Where the garden, yeah, we'll talk about the garden, I guess, because it shows up first, right? Becomes this kind of liminal space in many ways. Gardens is a different sort of garden. Pexton is a different sort of gardener. The oil is their flower. So there's this sense in which I love this passage so much, I don't even know where to begin. Right? Because there's the sense that we imagine gardens as a beautiful place, right? If you say garden, there is a certain expectation, right? Flowers,
Full of
trees,
life.
full of life, right? And yet, gardens, in the Pexton sense, becomes an area of growth and cultivation, of extraction. They're using garden in like the vegetable garden type of sense, except instead of a carrot, you're growing, right, oil. So the use of flower here almost becomes really interesting because you don't cultivate flowers, right? Or, well, you do, you can buy flowers, but like generally when we imagine a cultivatable garden, it's something like fruits and vegetables, right? And it's still beautiful. It's still something worth contemplating as an image, right? But there's a really powerful use of language here, where Pexton is emphasizing the flower element, and you'll notice that throughout the novel, they keep referring to oil as flowers, or flowers in some sense, right? So there's this association that's being made throughout, and again, this rhetorical association that's being made throughout between the beautiful thing and beautiful project that Paxton is operating under, right? But in reality, what they're doing is anything but gardening flowers, right? The metaphor is a lie in this case. But it's a lie insofar as like what the flower is or what they're cultivating. But at the same time, it's true insofar as what a garden actually is. Is a garden a natural occurrence? Like in the garden in your backyard, is it a natural occurrence?
No.
No, right? It's the same way that we use the term landscape. Landscapes are always a constructed thing.
Are
right?
They?
Yeah,
There
of
are
course.
no natural landscapes?
So in the abstract sense, they're always constructed.
Oh.
Right? Like there is something that existed, like a mountain or whatever, that exists naturally. We never plopped a mountain there, right? But
that's why I was confused. I was like,
but in what we consider to be a part of the landscape, it's absolutely a construction. Right? So when there's a painting, for example, of a landscape, the painter decided to begin the landscape somewhere and end it somewhere, the most beautiful part, right? Completely ignoring what comes before and after.
Then that would be man-made.
Right.
Okay.
Right. The landscape itself becomes man-made. Right.
Okay.
We talked about the Romantics. A really good example of this would be Wordsworth's lines written above Tintern Abbey. right? Which, if you haven't read it, it's a phenomenal poem.
But I feel like in that poem, he's more. It's more about space than place.
Sure, but it's a good example of how landscape is constructed, right?
Oh.
In the sense that he's looking at this abbey from miles above, this destroyed abbey, and he's like, wow, look at all the like flowers that are overtaking it and vines that are overtaking this destroyed abbey, and it's a great commentary on like how nature just overcomes any human-made constructions, and oh my god, I'm just fleeting, and I'm having an existential crisis because I'm Wordsworth and that's all I can do, blah, blah, blah. And it's fantastic, right? I love it.
Gotta love the romantics.
Yeah, no. And again, I'm not saying this critically. There's a lot to admire from it. But what that poem ignores is that by that point, the river and all of that, the landscape that he's describing would have already been very much polluted by the industrial waste that was already being formed in that area of England that he's talking about. Right, but he's completely ignoring that from his imagined view of the landscape. Right, so that's what I mean when I say landscape is a construction. Right, we always pick and choose what we see and talk about in our world around us. Right? Okay. Anything else we want to add on gardens before again I just go on like these weird tangents through existential poetry? Okay. So I'll launch the question back to you then, and back to space, since you rightly brought me back to it.
What was the mission?
So, okay, yeah, that's what I'm formulating right now.
Okay, sorry.
So we talked about gardens, but there's another element here that does discuss space, and that is the pipelines. In what way does the pipeline, in that passage that I brought up on page 29, in what way does it construct a certain space? Or does it manage space? I think it does so in a really interesting way, actually. Okay, so let's read it out here. I ask Papa if the pipelines that begin in the gardens, let's see, so the gardens, even though they're described in natural terms, they're more like an industrial yard type of thing. If the pipelines that begin in gardens have an end, so they go on somewhere here, right, out to the ocean, right, as we know by the end, to that place called America over there, into the infinite ocean. They seem to run on forever, wrapping around our village, okay, and passing over the river, through our farms, deep into the forest that ends nowhere in sight. And in the case of the pipelines, they start at the oil wells and end in a faraway town many hours by bus. Blah, blah, blah. Right? So let's have a little village here. Right? There's farms. Okay. What else does it pass by?
The
river. Passing over the river. So we'll make the river here. Okay. And the forests. Okay. Good. So, awful pipeline. Here, we'll make the pipeline a little bit thicker. Okay, just so we can clearly identify it. So, what's being constructed here is an image, right, of a space, right? Not only does the pipeline, in a sense, kind of create its own border, right? It's literally talked about. It wraps around our village, right? I didn't draw it as well in that sense, but right, it contains the village, right? It becomes its own border, but also on the wider scale of cutting across a territory, right, from some village, in West Africa to the ocean. So it, much like a border, it just kind of like cuts through arbitrarily, as you rightfully pointed out in your presentation. But it also manages specific places, right? Manages the farm, manages the forests, right? Probably there were trees cut down in order to make place for a pipeline, right? It certainly has an impact on the forest, even if it didn't cut through explicitly, right? And the end nowhere in sight, right? It just goes on and on and on, right? It becomes this abstract image that goes on into infinity, right? So technically the pipeline begins in a place, right? It begins in the gardens, but by the end of this passage, it goes into infinity, goes into America. It becomes a space in the most abstract of senses, and it becomes a legislator of space as well, right? In the sense that you're talking about, Aya. Does that make sense for everyone? Yeah. That's why I wanted to talk about this passage. I think it's just like so. There, every once in a while in books like this, you'll just find these passages. You're like, I could talk for 3 hours about this.
So these would all be like places, and then the entirety of it would be a space.
I would say so.
Yeah,
I would say so. Yeah. Wow, for once that my drawings actually did something. Nice. Yay! Anything else we want to add on that? Arguably, it then goes on once we get to America into legislating that own space as well, right? The way that we build highways and so on is entirely car-centric, right? And so on. The way that we built suburbs and etc.
I feel like the vastness of it, it makes it harder for like someone or like the people in the book to imagine an end to it, but also imagine ending this very powerful and vast force.
Good. Which brings us back, unintentionally, but very well, to the difference between colonialism and neocolonialism. When we talk about neocolonialism, this is often what we're talking about, is this drawing in the back, right? It's an American-owned pipeline, right, that does have a foothold in Africa, right, and sends its products to America, back to the quote-unquote colonial heartland, if you will, or imperial heartland. But you're absolutely right. You like, how do you actually like engage with this in a meaningful way? Like, okay, yeah, you can blow up a pipeline, sure, right? Which is what some activists have done, especially. You don't really see it very often here in North America because we have an aversion to such things, but you see it in many places across the world. But that doesn't really stop the company back in America, right? Whereas compare it to the colonial, to the I guess regular colonial moment, right, where you could clearly identify, okay, well, this person, this British entity, right? Often it was done through private companies, quote unquote, right? The East India Company or whatever, the Dutch West Indies, etc. Owned this very specific part of land, right? The Belgians owned the Congo. The British and French kind of cooperated with Egypt or whatever, right? And so on and so forth. And you could clearly identify, okay, well, if I attack this institution, this is where it'll have an impact, right? In India, it is very clearly recognized as the British Raj, right? The representative of the Queen in India, right? Like, it is a classic figure. Right? Now, in a world where companies are legally identified as individuals, right? With the same rights as individuals, which is the most depressing thought that I can have. How do you actually go about dismantling this, right? You can't unseat the British Raj in the same way. You can't unseat the head of Exxon the same way that you unseated the British Raj, right? Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm guessing I haven't read the whole
Yes.
thing, but I'm guessing that's what they're getting at with
Right.
like trying to. I don't know how far you got, but when they do kidnap the leader, the sick one and the fat one, they like want to get to the head at Bizam and then maybe in America.
Yeah.
They're just asking for names, but
yeah.
like,
they want to follow the trail back.
That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. Next week, we'll talk about how that actually works, right? If it works, in what way does it work, and how different forms of resistance, because that's one form of resistance that takes place in the novel, but arguably there are others. Not to put too fine a point on it, because we're almost up on time, but what was I going to say? Yeah, the use of education, for example, is one thing that I think is maybe worth considering as a form of resistance, right? One of the narratives, for example, is from the perspective of school children, but also some of the characters, get educated in the classical sense, right? There's explicit references to, you were talking about Fanon earlier, there's explicit references to The Wretched of the Earth, right? Both as a title, right? And it's later on in the novel. It's fine if you didn't get it. It's just one character brings it up at some point.
Oh. Is it the Madman?
No, it's not the Madman, although we should talk about the Madman, probably. I would argue that he's maybe a form of resistance as well.
I feel like Fanon would have loved him.
Yeah, we've talked about Deleuze and Guattari very quickly as well, in relation to forage, and like the whole rhizomatic idea. I would argue that one of their ideas as well ties into the madman of the village, right? Because they had this great idea. It never really panned out in real life, but this great idea that the only way to truly be a radical or a revolutionary, however you want to qualify that, is to be like a schizo, in their terms, right? And to just like completely break from reality in that sense. So you can maybe like unpack that. We can maybe unpack that a little bit as to whether or not that actually plays out. Spoilers, their clinical experiments did not play out that way. Shoot. Where was it? Anyway, here, like on page 164, they talk about wretched and the oppressed and so on and so forth. So there is an element of like formal education, or what we're educated on, right? Which, of course, the More Mother song brought up in some respect, that I think we can pick back up on next week as well, right? Any other points to make? Again, I wanted to finish a little bit earlier just because we didn't take a second break. So,
who are they talking about in this?
I forget.
Who is she? The one that owns the books.
Oh shoot, what's her name? She was the daughter of one of the characters.
Is she like a central character?
I would say there is no central character to this novel.
Oh.
I think that's one of the more interesting parts of it as well, because each.
Because I got the sense, because I didn't make it like past chapter 4, but I got the sense that the little girl in chapter 2 is pretty important.
Yeah, so there are important characters, but as far as main characters are concerned, that I wouldn't say there is one specific one, because each part, or like they cycle through different narratives. Right?
I got to the 3rd chapter and I was expecting it to be the children again or something. Yeah. And when it was, is it Bungo? I was surprised.
Yeah. Right. So, again, we can maybe talk about that a little bit, but this whole idea of decentering the narrative is, again, one of the ways in which, as a text and as a conceptual apparatus, we might think of resistance. Right? I'm thinking specifically of Well, a lot of Africanists, right, in the 1950s and 60s, kind of embraced this idea of like, yes, we are individual peoples, right, with our own cultures, but also we are kind of like un-African collective, right, who are resisting colonial or neo-colonial oppression. Right? More recently, people like Michael Hart and Antonio Negri in Italy have taken a Marxist perspective on this, where they see or they use the concept of the multitude, right? This kind of ultimate kind of decentering against what they see as capitalist hegemony, right? Um, which is like the ultimate form of monopoly, right, or whatever. Again, there's a lot to kind of maybe unpack and disagree with on that, but their basic idea is to kind of decenter these narratives, right, or these imposed narratives. So on a structural level, you might kind of identify this in the text as well as a form of resistance. Mm-hmm. Something that maybe DeLillo was trying to get at a little bit last week, but not quite in the same way, right? DeLillo's novel is very much interested in it in a literary sense because he's doing a literary experiment at this time, whereas Imbolo Imbue is explicitly political, right? To come back to what you were talking about earlier. Okay, I think I've said. Yeah, does anyone have any, do any of you have any like questions or anything like that for next week?
Let me just check. What's the theory text again?
Oh, it's the Catherine Yusoff one. I didn't put a PDF up of it. I put like a link, a web link, so it might be a bit difficult to annotate, but it's as good as any that I found. So if you're wondering, sorry, it's from, if you're wondering, it's from her text. What is an excerpt of? It's an excerpt of her book from 2012, 2013 called A Billion Black Anthropocenes or None, right? Which is quite good overall and kind of unpacks a lot of the central ideas that you'll see in this article, which is the first chapter, basically.
So it's like it's a part of a broader book.
Yeah, exactly. I think it still reads as a self-contained piece pretty well, which is why I gave it to you. But yes, it is part of a wider book. So yeah, hold on. I'll write that down before I forget. Narrative structure as resistance. Sometimes I think of things as I say them. As resistance. And then as figure. Okay. Any other questions?
All good.
Brilliant. In that case, thank you again, Aya, for your lovely presentation, and I will see you all next week.